Hey everyone! Tonight we step straight into a ballroom that looks like it belongs in a dream, but trust me, it quickly becomes a nightmare. Imagine the chandeliers glittering, the polished marble floor gleaming, the music swelling. Now imagine the sound of glass shattering because someone just slapped you hard enough to send your spectacles flying. That was me. And here's the reality check: you might not survive this one. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing who's out there sharing these moments with me. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. My name is Aurora Hughes, and on the night of my son's wedding, I learned just how far love can twist before it finally breaks. The slap came out of nowhere. My glasses clattered to the ballroom floor, one lens cracking in half like a tiny thunderclap beneath the music. 130 guests froze in silence. My cheek burned, but it wasn't the sting that made me tremble. It was the realization that Juliet, my new daughter-in-law, in her pristine white gown, had just struck me because I refused to hand her the keys to my apartment. Her voice rang out, sharp and venomous. That's what you get for being selfish. A woman your age doesn't need so much space. Nobody moved. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Others sipped their champagne as if humiliation was just another act in the evening's entertainment. But not one person stepped forward. Not even Ethan, my son. He stood beside her, staring at the floor, as though I had vanished entirely. I crouched down, gathering the pieces of my broken glasses with hands that shook more from heartbreak than fear. Around me, whispers fluttered like moths. Poor thing. She looks so fragile. The bride is right, she can't take care of herself anymore. She belongs in a retirement home. Each comment pressed on me like acid against an open wound. Juliet smoothed her gown and smiled, her voice honeyed with cruelty. You're not welcome here anymore. Ethan and I need our privacy. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better. Her words slid through the air like a blade. I had endured months of her little digs, my clothes too plain, my car too old, my part-time job too embarrassing. But this was the line that could not be crossed. I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my dignity unraveling under their stares. Tears blurred my vision, but inside me, something ancient and firm shifted. The slap wasn't just a strike, it was the death knell of silence. For years, I had cultivated a life that looked modest. To Juliet and everyone else, I was a 68-year-old widow living on a small pension. working a few shifts at a flower shop, wearing department store clothes, and carrying a scuffed black purse. What they never knew, what I had carefully hidden, was the truth Robert and I had decided decades ago. Robert, my late husband, wasn't the simple office worker people thought he was. He was clever, cautious, and quiet. Together we built a life, an empire even, and then wrapped it in plain brown paper so no one would ever guess. His favorite saying was, "Visible wealth attracts problems. Invisible wealth gives you power." He was right, though neither of us expected the problems would come from within our own family. As I walked out of the ballroom, conversations trailed after me like smoke. Juliet laughed with her bridesmaids, no doubt relishing the scene. Ethan stayed silent, his eyes glued to the floor. My son, my only child. I stepped into the cool night air. The chill slapped me harder than Juliet had. My hands shook as I fished my phone from my purse. A purse that had seen 5 years of wear, not because I couldn't replace it, but because I never saw the point of impressing people who didn't care. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom. Immediately. Bring the documents we spoke about. It's time." His voice was low but steady. "Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes? Once we do this, there's no turning back." I glanced back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Juliet's laughter spilling out like poison. Ethan stood beside her, weak and silent. I've never been more sure. 30 minutes, Carlos said. I slid into my old sedan parked under a street lamp. My reflection in the cracked rearview mirror startled me, my cheek flushed, my eyes wet but hardening. In 25 minutes, their lives would change forever. In 25 minutes, they would learn that humiliating me was the biggest mistake they had ever made. As I waited, the night wind rattled the leaves overhead, shadows swaying like ghosts across the pavement. My mind unraveled memories like a spool of thread. Juliet's first visit, her disdain for my home, the constant needling about my age, her sly comments about how a woman like me couldn't keep up with an apartment so big. I had endured it all in silence, watching her perform concern while her eyes measured the size of my living room. I thought about something I'd read once, that in some cultures, humiliating an elder is considered worse than theft because it robs them of their dignity, something that can't be bought back. Academic maybe, but sitting there, cheeks burning, I knew it was true. And I thought of Robert. If he were here, he'd probably make one of his dry jokes something like, "Well, at least the slap saved you from a boring toast." But behind the humor, he'd be furious for me, for what we had built, for the son we had raised who now stood on the wrong side of the line. The minutes crawled. I checked the clock, 20 minutes. I whispered to myself, this is not revenge. This is justice. This is survival. Because tonight, they were about to meet the real Aurora Hughes. Sitting in that car, watching the golden lights of the ballroom spill across the parking lot, I couldn't help but let my thoughts wander back through the life I had so carefully disguised. You see, people think modesty is weakness. Juliet certainly did. But modesty was my armor, stitched together over decades. Robert and I made the choice early in our marriage. He was brilliant with numbers, investments, and opportunities. I was the one who kept us grounded, making sure we never flaunted what we had to the outside world. He was just another office man with an ordinary paycheck. To our friends, we were just another middle-class couple clipping coupons, driving the same car year after year. Nobody suspected that behind the curtain we were steadily building something far larger: properties, accounts, investments layered like bricks in a quiet fortress. Robert used to say, if people don't think you have anything worth taking, they won't come knocking. He wasn't wrong. We lived in an era where neighbors compared cars, outfits, and vacation photos like badges of honor. We decided to opt out of that game entirely. And so the disguise began. A modest apartment, hand-me-down furniture we could easily afford to replace but didn't. I worked part-time at a flower shop, not because I needed the paycheck, but because I loved the smell of lilies and roses clinging to my clothes when I came home. That shop gave me peace, and more importantly, it gave people the illusion that I was just another widow trying to keep busy. Juliet never saw it as peace, though she saw it as poverty. From the very first time she stepped into my home, I caught the shadow of judgment on her face. Her voice was sugary, but the venom was there. How cozy, she said, eyes sweeping across my old sofa and the faded curtains Ethan had grown up with. That one word told me everything I needed to know about her. Cozy, in her language, meant small, insignificant. It reminded me of a quirky fact I once read in a design magazine that in Denmark, people pride themselves on the word hygge, which means cozy and simple living. They believe coziness is a form of wealth, the richness of feeling safe, comfortable, and loved. To me, hygge was real. To Juliet, it was laughable. And slowly, the comments sharpened. Aurora, don't you think you'd be happier in a modern apartment? She asked once, flipping through a glossy magazine of high-rise condos. Aurora, at your age, you shouldn't be worrying about maintenance. Smaller spaces are safer. Ethan and I might have kids soon. Do you know how much room a baby takes up? Every phrase was dressed as concern, but the stitching showed. She didn't want my comfort. She wanted my home. It was subtle at first, like little pricks of a needle. Comments about my old car being a hazard. Jokes about how my clothes were retro when they were just practical. Smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes when she asked why I was still working. "My son, my dear Ethan," echoed her words without even realizing it, like a parrot repeating lines it didn't fully understand. He'd say, "Mom, maybe Juliet's right. Maybe it would be easier if you downsized." He thought he was being helpful, but what he was really doing was slipping into her rhythm, beating the same drum of pressure. It wasn't just insulting, it was heartbreaking. I had raised him to respect work, to value character over possessions. And here he was, letting a woman's shallow judgment chip away at those very lessons. I often thought about something my grandmother used to say. The true measure of wealth is how little you show it. Back then, as a child, I didn't understand. Now, sitting across from Juliet with her designer handbag resting carelessly on my coffee table, I understood it perfectly. She measured worth by brands and square footage. I measured it by quiet evenings, by laughter, by memories held within walls. But the thing about small insults is that they build drop by drop. They carve out rivers. And after 2 years of enduring her comments, my river had grown deep. The night of the wedding, when her hand struck my face, it wasn't just about that one moment. It was the culmination of every snide remark, every fake smile, every way she treated me like an obstacle rather than a human being. Funny how you can spend decades hiding your wealth from the world, and in the end, it's your own family who comes sniffing for it. I think about it now and realize Juliet never hated my apartment for being too old or too big. She hated it because it represented stability, something she and Ethan didn't have. Stability isn't flashy, but it's powerful, and she wanted it, no matter the cost. That night, as I waited for Carlos in the parking lot, I realized I had been playing my role too well, too modest, too quiet, too invisible. And in their eyes, invisibility meant weakness. They mistook my silence for poverty. They mistook my kindness for frailty. They mistook me. And that mistake was about to be the most expensive one of their lives. I can still picture that first night Ethan brought Juliet to my apartment. It was 2.5 years ago, though the memory feels pressed into me like a scar. Ethan had that nervous smile I remembered from when he was a boy. The kind he wore when he wanted me to approve of something before I even had a chance to form an opinion. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he'd said, holding her hand like she was his lifeline. Juliet stepped through the doorway in heels that clicked against my old linoleum floor. Her hair was perfect, her perfume sharp and expensive. The kind that lingers long after the person leaves. She smiled wide, dazzling, but somehow hollow. And then I saw it, the quick scan. Her eyes swept across my living room, the thrift store lamp, the secondhand sofa, the framed photos on the wall. Her face didn't fall exactly, but it stiffened, like she had expected a stage set and instead walked into a waiting room. "How cozy," she murmured, her voice just a little too sweet. I noticed her hand tighten on Ethan's arm. He didn't catch it, but I did. Dinner that night was awkward in a way that only silence can make loud. I had spent the afternoon making Ethan's favorite pot roast with carrots and potatoes. Juliet barely touched it, pushing the food around her plate like it might stain her manicure. "I'm watching my figure," she said lightly, as though explaining why she was too refined to eat the meal that had been simmering for hours. When I asked about her family, she gave vague answers, polished and empty, but she wasn't nearly as vague when it came to me. "And how do you manage Mrs. Hughes?" she asked, her fork clinking against the plate. "It must be hard to live on just a widow's pension. I mean, Ethan told me you still work at a flower shop. That's admirable." Admirable. The way she said it, I could almost hear the unspoken pitiful. I smiled politely. "I managed just fine." But inside, I filed her words away. "My husband once told me, a woman who asks about your finances on the first dinner isn't after your heart. She's after your wallet." I should have remembered that warning sooner. Over the next few visits, her mask slipped more and more. Every time she came to my apartment, she found a new way to criticize while pretending she was offering advice. "This building is really too old. Aurora, don't you worry about the plumbing failing one day." "These curtains, oh, I think my grandmother had the same ones back in the 90s. Wouldn't you feel safer in a smaller place? Closer to neighbors who could check on you?" Her words were barbed wire wrapped in lace. And Ethan, blinded by infatuation, never noticed the cuts. The worst was the day I overheard her on the phone. Ethan had stepped into the bathroom, and I went to refill the teapot. Juliet's voice floated in from the kitchen, hushed but sharp. "Yes, Mom," she said. "His mom's apartment is in a prime neighborhood. If I can convince her to move into a senior place, we can stay there until we find something better. She's so naive. She'll probably even thank us for helping her transition." I froze, teapot in hand, the steam rising between us like a curtain. My heart thudded, but I didn't move. When Ethan came back into the room, she ended the call with a laugh, slipping her phone into her designer purse. She looked up at me and smiled like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. From that moment on, every interaction was a performance. She played the devoted fiancé, and I played the frail, harmless widow. But in truth, I was studying her, watching, measuring, like a chess game where both players think they're winning. Ethan didn't see it. He never did. He laughed at her little remarks, nodded when she suggested things, and slowly, he began to parrot her words. "Mom, Juliet's right. Maybe a smaller place would be safer for you." That one nearly broke me. My son, repeating her script like a trained line. The boy I raised to think for himself was now a shadow following someone else's steps. It's funny, though history is filled with warnings about this exact thing. Did you know Socrates once argued that love can make a person blind to reason? Turning them into a willing captive, I used to think that sounded too dramatic. Now, watching Ethan slip further under Juliet's spell, I realized maybe old philosophers weren't so far off. Still, I kept my face calm, my words steady, because what Juliet didn't know and what Ethan had forgotten was that modesty wasn't weakness. It was camouflage. She thought she was circling prey, but really, she was walking straight into a trap. 2 weeks before the wedding, Juliet decided it was time to escalate. She didn't come alone this time. I remember opening my apartment door to find not just Ethan and Juliet standing there, but also her parents, 2 people I had barely spoken to before. Her mother wore a blazer sharp enough to cut glass, and her father had that assessing look of a man appraising property rather than visiting family. My stomach dropped. I already knew what this was. "Aurora," Juliet's mother began smoothly as they all settled in my living room. "We wanted to talk to you about your future." Her future. My life. My home. Dressed up as concern. Juliet's father leaned forward, his voice firm. "At your age, living alone in such a large apartment isn't just unnecessary, it's dangerous. What if you fall? What if you need medical attention and no one finds you for days?" I watched Ethan out of the corner of my eye. He didn't speak at first, just nodded along, his hands folded like a student in a classroom, waiting to repeat the lesson. "Finally," he said, "Mom, maybe they're right. Maybe it's time to think about what's best for everyone." Everyone. Not me. Not my dignity. Not the life Robert and I had built within these walls. Everyone. Meaning him and Juliet. The words cut deep. I sat quietly, letting them speak their rehearsed lines. Juliet took out glossy brochures for senior living communities. She spread them on my coffee table like business contracts, her nails tapping against each page. "This one has 24-hour medical care, group activities, prepared meals," she said brightly. "You'd be surrounded by people your age." Doesn't that sound lovely? I couldn't help but laugh. Just once, low and bitter. "Lovely," I repeated. And what would happen to this apartment? The silence was answer enough. Juliet's parents exchanged a glance, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably. But Juliet, bold as ever, met my eyes. It would be perfect for us. Ethan and I are starting our life together. We'll need the space. You'd be more comfortable somewhere else anyway. Her fake compassion made my skin crawl. I leaned back, folding my arms. "And what if I refuse?" Juliet's father cleared his throat. "Then we'll have to explore other measures. If your mental health deteriorates, the courts could step in. Of course, no one wants it to come to that." There it was. The threat. Legal guardianship. Incompetence. The word they didn't dare say aloud, but hung in the air like smoke. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice rehearsed. Mom, we're just trying to help. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I studied his face, the son I had raised, the boy who once built me birthday cards out of scrap paper when we couldn't afford much. Now he sat there, silent as his in-laws threatened to strip me of my autonomy. That night, after they left, I cried not because of fear, but because of clarity. I wasn't imagining things. They weren't just greedy. They were planning a full ambush, with Ethan willingly standing beside them. It reminded me of a story I once read about wolves. Did you know wolves don't usually attack prey head-on? They circle, test, pressure from different angles until the animal tires and makes a mistake. That's what Juliet and her family were doing, circling, waiting for me to falter. But I wasn't prey. I picked up the phone and called Carlos. My voice shook, but my words were firm. It's time, I told him. Prepare the documents. If they want to play this game, they'll learn I've been holding the board all along. Carlos hesitated. Mrs. Hughes, once we reveal everything, there's no going back. Family relationships. Family relationships. I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping. If they can plot to declare me incompetent, then family has already died. When I hung up, I walked slowly around my apartment. I touched the dining table where Robert and I had shared thousands of meals. I paused by the window where Ethan used to wave to me from the school bus. They wanted me to give this up, to trade history and dignity for a cage disguised as convenience. No! That night, something solid clicked into place inside me. The woman they thought was frail and helpless had just been reborn. The morning after that ambush, I woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow ache in my chest. Sleep had been nothing but a carousel of nightmares, Juliet's smug smile, Ethan's silence, those glossy brochures spread across my coffee table like vultures circling a carcass. I made myself tea and sat by the window, staring out at the city that glowed with its usual indifference. To everyone else, it was just another Wednesday. To me, it was the morning after my son had agreed to erase me. I couldn't let that thought fester. I needed facts, hard truths, so I called Amelia, an old friend who still worked in real estate. She was sharp, discreet, and loyal, the kind of woman who could smell greed a mile away. Amelia, I said, my voice shaking less than I expected. I need you to look into Juliet and Ethan's finances. Everything. Rent, credit cards, loans. If I'm right, this isn't about love, it's about survival. Her sigh told me she already suspected the answer. Give me a few days, Aurora. I'll find what you need. Those days crawled by. Every hour felt stretched thin. like a violin string wound too tight. I distracted myself with little routines, watering my plants, folding laundry, chatting with Joseph, my neighbor. But under every small act pulsed the same dread. What if my suspicions are right? When Amelia finally called, her voice was grave. "Aurora, you need to sit down." The report was devastating, though not surprising. Ethan's salary as a sales manager was about $45,000 a year. His debts, more than $80,000 in credit cards alone. Juliet's part-time income was barely a drop in the ocean of her spending habits. Their cars, financed with payments they could never sustain. Their rent, 3 months overdue. And the wedding, the wedding was stacked high on loans they had no way of repaying. But the part that truly shattered me was this: for 6 months, Ethan had been calling banks, asking about loans against my apartment. He had even inquired about power of attorney over seniors. My son, my only child, planning my dispossession like a business transaction. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. My breath came shallow, my heart thudding like it wanted to break free from my ribs. It felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, like my home, the place I thought of as solid ground, had become a trapdoor. Later that night, Joseph knocked on my door. He held a brown paper bag with pastries and a thermos of coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. "I think I have," I whispered. Then I told him everything. His jaw tightened. I knew that girl was poison. But Ethan, I never thought. He shook his head. "You've done too much for that boy." I laughed bitterly. Too much. Try financing his life for the past 3 years. The car, the rent discounts, even some of the wedding expenses. He thought they came from bonuses and tax breaks. They came from me. Joseph's eyes widened. "Aurora, you've been his safety net." "Yes," I said, my voice flat. "And tonight, I'm cutting the net." Funny thing, when you've spent years hiding your strength, people forget you have any. I'd read somewhere that in certain martial arts, the best fighters aren't the flashy ones. They're the quiet ones who wait until the exact right moment to strike. That night, I realized I wasn't just quiet. I was patient, and my patience was done. I called Carlos again. My decision sharp now, no tremor in my voice. End the transfers. All of them. Cancel the guarantees. The car lease. The rent backstop. Even the ballroom deposit. By the time that reception is over, they'll understand what it feels like to stand without a net. Carlos was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Mrs. Hughes, I hope you know this will break them." "No," I replied, staring out at the city lights. "This won't break them. This will finally show them the pieces they already are." And as I hung up, I realized something. For years, I'd lived modestly out of choice. Now, I would use that modesty like a sword, They thought I was powerless. They were about to learn that invisibility is the most powerful shield of all. By the time the wedding day arrived, my decision had hardened into steel. I wore my simplest dress, the pale blue one Juliet had once mocked as grandmotherly. I pinned my hair back, slipped on my scuffed shoes, and looked in the mirror at a woman everyone underestimated. And I smiled, because tonight the mask would come off. But before the confrontation, something else gnawed at me Robert's truck. It wasn't just any old vehicle. It was his pride, his companion during late fishing trips, his sanctuary on long drives when he needed to think. Juliet had tricked me into signing paperwork months earlier, telling me it was routine insurance. I didn't realize until later that I'd essentially signed away ownership. That betrayal still burned. The truck sat in Ethan's parking lot like a trophy, a symbol of how thoroughly they thought they'd stripped me of everything. Each time I passed it, I whispered to Robert, "Don't worry, I'll get it back." I had already spoken with Carlos about the documents. The ownership transfer Juliet engineered was riddled with flaws. She had been sloppy, rushing through her deceit. Tonight, that truck and everything else would come back to me. As I sat in the parking lot outside the ballroom, folder in hand, I thought about the irony. For 3 years, I had been feeding Ethan's life support system without him even knowing. Monthly transfers, quiet bailouts. The flower shop job had been my camouflage, but the truth was, I could have retired a decade earlier. They thought I was frail, but what I had always been, was deliberate. The music from the ballroom leaked through the night air, muffled and distant. I imagined the champagne glasses clinking, the laughter echoing. Juliet was probably telling the story of her triumphant slap by now, gloating about how she'd put the old woman in her place. She had no idea the ground was already crumbling beneath her heels. I glanced at the documents Carlos had prepared. Lease cancellations, transfer terminations, suspension of all financial guarantees, and most satisfying of all, the notice reclaiming ownership of Robert's truck. It reminded me of something I once read in a history book in medieval times. Castles weren't always conquered by force. Sometimes they were starved out, cut off from supplies until surrender was inevitable. That was what I had done to Ethan and Juliet. They thought they had me cornered. In truth, they were the ones inside the castle, and I was the one pulling away every bridge, every supply line. When Carlos's headlights finally appeared in the parking lot, I felt a calm settle over me. He stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand, his expression serious but steady. "Aurora," he said, "I have everything, but I'll ask one last time, are you sure?" I looked back at the ballroom, at the laughter that was about to die in throats. "I'm sure." He nodded. Then tonight, we set the record straight. We walked together toward the glowing doors. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. After years of silence, of hiding, of enduring insults disguised as concern, tonight I would reclaim not just my wealth, not just Robert's truck, but my dignity. Inside, Juliet would still be basking in the illusion of her victory. Ethan would still be convincing himself he was doing what was best for everyone. But in just a few moments, the story would turn. And when it did, they would finally learn the difference between modesty and weakness. The moment Carlos and I stepped through the ballroom doors, the music stuttered to a stop, like even the band could sense the storm rolling in. 130 guests turned to stare. I felt every eye on me, the widow who had just been slapped into silence not an hour earlier. But this time, I wasn't trembling. I was steady. Juliet's laughter rang out from the center of the dance floor. She had been basking, no doubt, in her little victory. But when she saw me, her face pinched, as if she'd tasted something bitter. "What are you doing here?" she spat. "I thought you got the hint." I almost smiled. "Oh, Juliet, the hint is about to be yours." Oh.
Carlos cleared his throat, his lawyer's voice cutting through the room like a bell. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. I have urgent financial matters concerning Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." A hush fell over the crowd. A few guests pulled out their phones, ready to capture what they instinctively knew was about to become legend. Ethan's face paled. He stepped forward, stammering, "Mom, what's going on?" I met his eyes. "It's time you learned the truth." Carlos opened his folder and read aloud with surgical precision. "Effective immediately, the financial guarantees provided by Mrs. Aurora Hughes are terminated. The Hughes apartment lease, previously secured under her name, will be revoked within 30 days unless alternative arrangements are made." Gasps rippled across the room. Ethan's hands twitched at his sides. "Lease secured under? What are you talking about?" Carlos continued relentlessly. "In addition, the monthly transfers of $4,500 you have been receiving to cover rent, credit card bills, and miscellaneous expenses are suspended indefinitely." Juliet's shriek split the air. "That's a lie. She's broke. Look at her dress, her purse, her pathetic little car." I let her words hang in the silence, then spoke softly. "Appearances deceive, Juliet. That's a lesson you're about to learn." The guests whispered, their curiosity now a tidal wave. I saw Juliet's mother stiffen, her eyes darting between her daughter and the documents. She must have realized that the empire her daughter had promised was crumbling into dust. Carlos pulled out the final notice. "And lastly, the guaranteed payment for this evening's celebration ballroom, catering, flowers, and photography has been canceled." The ballroom manager, a burly man in a dark suit, stepped forward, his face tight. "Unless another form of payment is provided tonight,
We'll have to suspend the event." The murmurs turned into outright shock. Some guests began edging toward the exits, not wanting to be caught in the fallout. Others leaned forward, fascinated, as though watching a live theater performance with stakes higher than any play could offer. Ethan staggered toward me, his voice breaking. "Mom, you were paying for all of this all along."
I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy who once cried when he dropped his ice cream cone, the boy who clung to my hand on his first day of school. And then I saw the man he had become, complicit, silent, willing to let his wife slap his mother to get a set of keys.
"Yes, Ethan," I said quietly. "For 3 years, I've been carrying you. But tonight, that ends."
Juliet's face crumpled, hysteria flooding her voice. "You can't do this. We're family. You're old and confused. You don't know what you're doing."
The irony almost made me laugh. Confused? No, Juliet. For the first time in years, I see everything clearly. I took the papers from Carlos and held them high. Tonight, I take back my home, my dignity, my husband's truck, and my silence ends here. The guests erupted into whispers, their eyes wide with disbelief, their phones recording every second. Juliet's perfect wedding night had transformed into a public unmasking. And as I looked around that glittering ballroom, I realized something humiliation cuts both ways. They had slapped me. Now, I was slapping back with the truth. Juliet's scream still echoed when the room went quiet again, so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning above the chandeliers. She looked at Ethan, panic in her eyes, her carefully painted mask slipping for the first time. "Ethan, say something," she hissed. But Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His face had drained of all color. He was caught between the truth in Carlos's documents and the lies he and Juliet had been living. Juliet stumbled backward, her train tangling under her heels. She looked less like a bride now and more like a cornered animal. "She's bluffing," she shouted at the guests. "She's an old woman. She's making this up." Carlos calmly handed a copy of the documents to the ballroom manager, who skimmed them with a furrowed brow. "It's all legitimate," he said grimly, "unless there's another payment. This celebration ends tonight." A ripple of gasps went through the crowd. Someone near the back muttered, "She paid for all of this." And suddenly, the whispers weren't pitying me anymore. They were pitying Ethan and Juliet. Juliet collapsed into a chair, clutching her head. "Everything is ruined," she moaned. "The apartment, the money, the wedding." "Not ruined," I corrected softly, stepping closer. "Revealed. The only thing destroyed here are your illusions, Ethan's voice finally broke through, shaky, fragile. "Mom, please. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. Don't Don't take everything away. Hey. I looked at him, my heart twisting. He was still my son, but in that moment, he felt like a stranger. Ethan, the only way to fix this was to never break it in the first place.
Juliet's parents were frozen, faces pale as they realized the social disaster unfolding in front of them. Juliet, however, wasn't done. She dragged herself up and pointed at me, rage burning through her tears. "You're senile. That's what this is. You don't know what you're doing." I turned to the crowd, my voice calm but steady. "Senile. Let me ask you this. How senile does a woman have to be to secretly pay off her son's debts for 3 years, to keep a roof over his head, to finance the very wedding where she was humiliated? That's not confusion. That's love. Misplaced love." The ballroom was so still that even the photographers had stopped clicking. I drew in a long breath, and as of tonight, that misplaced love is over.
Carlos closed the folder with a crisp snap. Then, in a voice that carried across the marble floors, he announced, "One more matter, Mrs. Hughes has amended her will. All inheritance previously designated to Mr. Hughes has been redirected to senior protection charities."
The guests gasped as if the very chandeliers had crashed down. Juliet staggered again, her voice rising in hysteria. "You can't do that. He's your son. We're family." "Family?" I asked, tilting my head. Family doesn't slap a mother-in-law in front of 130 guests. Family doesn't conspire to declare an elder incompetent. Family doesn't sell off her dignity piece by piece. Ethan's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair, his voice breaking. "Mom, please." But I shook my head. The inheritance is gone. The support is gone. The safety net is gone. All that's left now is the truth. For the first time in years, I felt taller. My back straightened. My voice no longer trembled. They had mistaken my quiet life for weakness. But tonight, every guest saw what silence had been hiding strength. The music never came back on. Instead, the only soundtrack was Juliet's sobs, Ethan's hollow pleas, and the collective realization of 130 witnesses that they had just seen the night greed collapsed in on itself. The ballroom had become a stage, and every guest was an unwilling actor in a play they hadn't bought tickets for. Juliet crumpled into a chair, sobbing, her once flawless makeup streaking down her face. Her wedding gown, white silk, and pearls looked less like a symbol of new beginnings and more like a costume from a tragedy. Ethan hovered beside her, his hands shaking. He looked at me, his mother, as though I had become a stranger. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely, "you don't have to do this. We can work something out. You can't just walk away from us." I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let the tears fall. "Walk away, Ethan.
I walked toward you for 35 years. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every late night call for help, I was there. And tonight, you stood there while your wife slapped me.
A collective murmur rose from the guests. They remembered. Some had filmed it. The slap was no longer just an act of cruelty, it was evidence. Juliet raised her head, her face red and blotchy. It was just a mistake. One mistake. You're ruining our lives over nothing. I almost laughed. Nothing. That word tasted bitter. Respect is not nothing. Dignity is not nothing. Love is not nothing. You mistook my silence for weakness. Juliet, that was your mistake. Her mother tried to interject, standing stiffly. Perhaps this isn't the place for such matters. Maybe we should discuss. No, I cut her off. My voice was firmer than it had been in years. This is the place because you chose to humiliate me in public. And so here, in public, the truth will stand. The guests' eyes darted between us like spectators at a tennis match. Some clutched their glasses. Others whispered into their phones, recording every word. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a reckoning.
Lucy, my niece, stood from the back of the room, her face pale but determined. Aunt Aurora, she called, her voice trembling. I had no idea what Ethan and Juliet were planning. I swear, I never would have stood for this. She walked toward me, tears in her eyes. You don't deserve this. Not from family. I reached out and squeezed her hand, warmth flooding through me. I know, Lucy, you've always been different. You see people, not property.
Juliet sneered through her tears.
Oh, please. You're all acting like she's some kind of hero. She's a bitter old woman trying to destroy us.
I turned back to her. Destroy you, Juliet. I was the only reason you even had a wedding tonight. Every flower, every song, every catered dish was paid for with money you didn't earn. Without me, you wouldn't have had anything to destroy.
That silenced her. For once, she had no comeback.
Ethan sank into a chair beside her, covering his face with his hands. He was unraveling in front of everyone, the illusion of control gone. I stepped closer, my voice quiet but sharp enough for everyone to hear.
Ethan, my son,
I raised you to understand that kindness is not weakness. That generosity is not an invitation to exploit. Tonight, you learned the price of forgetting those lessons.
The wisdom felt old, borrowed from generations past. My grandmother used to say, a tree that bends too long for others eventually breaks. I had bent for Ethan my whole life. Tonight, I straightened.
Juliet sobbed louder, and the sight of her mascara streaks made me think of an odd little fact. I'd once read Cleopatra supposedly invented waterproof mascara. If only Juliet had known then, at least one thing tonight would have stayed intact.
The guests chuckled softly at the thought. Even in tragedy, there was room for irony. I looked around the room, at the faces witnessing this collapse. "Let this be a lesson," I said, my voice steady. "When you treat love like currency, when you mistake patience for stupidity, when you slap the hand that's been feeding you, it will eventually stop feeding you." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. 3 days after the wedding, the ballroom drama had turned into whispers that spread through town like wildfire. People called it "the night greed died under chandeliers." Strangers I didn't even know stopped me at the market just to squeeze my hand and say, "Good for you." Meanwhile, my phone didn't stop ringing. Ethan called 37 times, his messages shifting from rage to begging. Juliet texted me at least a dozen times, half threats, half hysterical pleas. Her parents even came to my door, pounding like debt collectors. But I didn't answer. Not once. Instead, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea, letting the spring breeze cool my face. For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. Carlos came by with updates. They've been evicted from their apartment. He told me, his voice steady. The landlord received notice of your canceled guarantee, and without it, they had 30 days. They didn't last 10. I nodded, unsurprised. And the ballroom debt. They're being sued for the full amount, $53,000, with late fees. I closed my eyes, letting the numbers settle. Those numbers were once invisible chains linking me to them. Chains I had forged myself in the name of protection. Now, those chains had snapped. Joseph, my neighbor, brought me pastries each morning, as though keeping vigil. He called it the Aurora Reclamation, which made me laugh. He said watching me stand up to Juliet was like watching an old oak tree finally drop the vines that had been strangling it. But peace didn't mean safety. Lucy came by one evening with Amelia, her real estate friend. Their faces were tense, eyes sharp. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy said, "they're not done." I've heard Juliet spreading rumors telling neighbors you're senile, unstable. She's building a case to declare you incompetent. I felt my stomach twist. I'd known they were manipulative, but this was darker. Amelia slid a folder across my table. Inside were legal documents. She's been consulting with lawyers. If she succeeds, they could strip you of your rights. The irony was almost unbearable. After everything, after I revealed the truth, they were still trying to paint me as weak. I took a deep breath, then let them try. I have evidence, I have witnesses, and I have something stronger than their lies, my voice. Carlos arrived later that week with even more news. Some of the guests who signed statements in support of Juliet have already changed their minds, he said. Videos from the wedding are circulating online. People see you standing tall while Juliet shrieks like a child. Public opinion isn't on their side. It was surreal. I'd spent a lifetime hiding in plain sight, and now strangers on the internet were calling me brave. One woman commented, "Aurora is the grandmother we all wish we had." I smiled, even laughed. Imagine that me, trending. I thought about something quirky I'd read once apparently. Lobsters never stop growing. They just shed their shells and keep expanding. Maybe I was like that. Maybe at 68, I was simply shedding my old shell, stepping into a new one that fit better. And yet, at night, when the house grew quiet, I still felt the ache. Ethan's silence hurt more than Juliet's rage ever could. He hadn't come himself. No apology, no attempt to bridge the abyss. Just phone calls filled with desperation, not love. I watered my plants and whispered to them like old friends. Respect, I told the leaves, is like water. With it, you grow. Without it, you wither. Juliet had thought slapping me would break me, but it hadn't. What broke instead was the illusion that love without respect could survive. And that, I realized, was the kind of truth you can't unlearn. 6 months passed, and the firestorm from that wedding hadn't cooled. It had only spread. The videos recorded by guests had gone viral. People I'd never met debated my life on forums and talk shows. Some called me a hero, others a cautionary tale. Either way, my name, Aurora Hughes, had become more than a widow's name. It had become a symbol. I never set out to be a symbol. I just wanted my dignity back. But sometimes, life hands you a stage, whether you ask for it or not. Carlos helped me prepare for the legal battle Juliet had tried to launch, claiming I was incompetent. Their case collapsed almost as soon as it began. My medical records, financial statements, and testimony from neighbors like Joseph painted a picture of someone sharper than ever. The judge dismissed it outright and, to add insult to their injury, fined them for wasting the court's time. Poetic justice, Carlos said with a small smile. Juliet didn't smile. She stormed out of the courthouse that day like a child denied candy. Ethan trailed behind her, shoulders slumped, not even glancing in my direction. That night, I sat with Joseph and Lucy on my balcony, sipping tea while the city lights glittered below us. "Do you ever wonder," Lucy asked softly, "if Ethan will ever come back to you, really come back?" I let the question hang in the air, heavy. "I wonder," I admitted, "but I also know some doors, once closed, should stay closed until the person knocking has learned how to walk through them with respect." It hurt to say it, but it was true. The strangest part of those months was how many strangers reached out. Letters poured in, emails, even children writing on behalf of their grandparents, saying, "Thank you for speaking up." I never realized how common my story was. So many families hiding the same wounds. I decided to channel that energy. With Carlos's help and Amelia's contacts, I started a foundation, the Aurora Fund for Dignity in Aging. The mission was simple: offer legal, financial, and emotional support to seniors facing manipulation from their own families. Within weeks, we had our first clients. By the end of the 3rd month, we'd saved 3 elderly people from being forced out of their homes. One of them, Margaret, a 74-year-old widow, hugged me with trembling arms and whispered, "You gave me back my voice." Her words lit something inside me I thought had gone out long ago. Purpose. Juliet, of course, kept trying to claw her way back into relevance. She called me a fraud on social media, said I'd staged everything for attention. But the internet has a short fuse for hypocrisy. People posted clips of her slap, her shrieks at the wedding, her own words betraying her greed. Each time she tried to smear me, the backlash grew louder. I'll admit there was satisfaction in that. One night, Joseph and I were sitting in the garden, and he chuckled. "You know, Aurora, if you were in ancient Rome, they'd carve your story on stone tablets as a warning." I laughed. Maybe, but knowing my luck, they'd spell my name wrong. Humor had returned to me slowly, like rain after drought. It felt good to laugh again, to feel lighter. But in quiet moments, I still thought of Ethan, the boy who once clutched my hand crossing the street, the man who had chosen silence over defending me. I missed him, and yet missing someone doesn't mean you let them keep hurting you. That was a hard-won truth. Respect, I'd come to realize, isn't something you beg for. It's something you require. And if people can't give it, then they can't stay. It was wisdom carved out of pain, but wisdom nonetheless. 2 years have passed since that night beneath the chandeliers, when I walked back into the ballroom, not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her power. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago. This morning, I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, the same spot where I once cried over Ethan's betrayal. Only now, the air feels different, lighter, as if the walls themselves have exhaled. My apartment, once the object of Juliet's obsession, has become more than just my home. It's a headquarters, a sanctuary, a place where people arrive broken and leave standing a little taller. The Aurora Fund has grown beyond anything I imagined. What began as a few cases has become a network of lawyers, social workers, and volunteers fighting for seniors who were told they were too old, too frail, too irrelevant to protect themselves. We've saved over 400 homes, reversed countless fraudulent contracts, and even pushed for new legislation to make elder exploitation harder to pull off. Last week, a senator shook my hand and said, "Aurora, you've started a movement. I just smiled, because all I ever wanted was to make sure no one else endured what I did.
Joseph is still by my side. He jokes that he accidentally became the vice president of a nonprofit at 72, and that the pastries he brings to meetings are essential morale boosters. Lucy moved into the apartment next door after her short-lived marriage ended. Now, she works as our education director, traveling to schools and community centers to teach young people what respect really looks like. Amelia handles the real estate side, untangling cases where children try to push parents out of their homes. Carlos, of course, is still my rock in the financial world, guiding our foundation with the same calm precision he used that night in the ballroom.
Ethan is a name I still say in my prayers. I've only heard from him 3 times in 2 years. Each call more about money than reconciliation. The last time, he said, "Mom, your pride is costing me my son." I told him calmly, "Ethan, my dignity is what will save him." I hung up for the first time in my life. It was strangely liberating. Yes, Juliet had a child, my grandson, Oliver, 14 months old now. I've never held him, never heard his laugh. Juliet sends the occasional message, claiming I'll regret not being in his life. But regret is a tricky thing. I regret the years I spent bending so far for Ethan that I nearly broke. I don't regret finally standing up straight. One day, maybe Oliver will come looking for answers, and when he does, he'll find more than a bitter story. He'll find a legacy trust funds in his name, records of the foundation, and a grandmother who refused to be erased. At 70, I feel younger than I did at 65. The headaches are gone. My sleep is deeper. My laughter is real again. Even my doctor told me my blood pressure looks like that of a woman a decade younger. It's proof that stress ages you faster than time ever could. In quiet moments, I still whisper to Robert, "You were right, my love." Visible wealth attracts problems, but invisible strength, that's the true fortune. And I've learned another truth sometimes. The family you're born into isn't the family you keep. Sometimes, real family is chosen the neighbors who bring you pastries, the niece who stands beside you, the friends who fight for your dignity when others try to steal it. If I could speak to the Aurora who trembled in that ballroom, glasses shattered on the floor, I'd tell her, "Don't be afraid. This humiliation will become your liberation. The slap meant to silence you will awaken your voice." And to anyone listening now, wondering if it's too late to stand up for yourself, let me whisper, it's never too late. Not at 60, not at 70, not ever. When I walked into my son Ethan's wedding, I never imagined the night would end with my daughter-in-law Juliet slapping me across the face in front of 130 guests. That moment, humiliating and raw, was the breaking point. For years,
I had lived modestly, hiding the wealth my late husband Robert and I had carefully built, while secretly supporting Ethan's reckless lifestyle. Juliet thought I was a frail, poor widow. She had no idea she was planning her future on a foundation I had quietly been funding. Their manipulation escalated until it became a full conspiracy. Juliet and her parents tried to force me into a senior residence, even exploring legal ways to declare me incompetent. My own son echoed their words like a puppet. That was when I decided enough was enough. With the help of Carlos, my trusted advisor, I ended every financial lifeline, reclaimed Robert's truck, and walked into that ballroom to expose the truth. Before stunned guests, I revealed the hidden support I had provided for years, every rent payment, every credit card bailout, even the very wedding they were celebrating. And then I cut it all off. I disinherited Ethan, redirecting my estate to charities that protect seniors from exploitation. Juliet collapsed in hysteria. Ethan begged, and the crowd watched their perfect illusion unravel. What followed was a storm: legal battles, rumors, even attempts to paint me as senile. But the truth won. Videos of the confrontation went viral, turning me into an unexpected symbol of dignity. I founded the Aurora Fund to protect other seniors, and in 2 years, it has saved hundreds from abuse. I lost my son, but I found my voice, and in doing so, I learned the most vital truth: love without respect is not love at all.